Last time we were talking about Aristotle's ethics, and we had gotten to the point where we asked this question. What is the function of a human being? What are you and I for? He goes through a number of things, thinking about excellence. He's thinking, well, what is it to live well? And he's thinking, well, think of other analogies where we've got a good knife, cutting well, for example. A good eye, seeing well, a good teacher, teaching well. What is it for a human being to live well? Well, in each of those other cases, he says there's a function. The eye has the function of seeing. The teacher has the function of teaching. The knife has the function of cutting. And so in order to determine what it is to live well, we need to know what our function is. What are we for? And are we doing that function, whatever it is, well or badly? So we ask the question, what is the function of a human being? Now, at first glance, that's a baffling question, right? What are human beings for? You might think that's a very odd thing. Indeed, some philosophers have said we're not for anything. We don't have a purpose. Some have said, well, it's up to us. You decide what your purpose is. Some religious thinkers have gone this far with Aristotle and said, I know what human beings are for, and then has filled in a religious answer to the question of what human beings have as a purpose. But however you think about this, it's a puzzling sort of question. And Aristotle doesn't think the answer is obvious. He says, here's how we tell what the function of something is. We look at what makes it special. We look at what is its distinguishing characteristic. So for example, knives are used for cutting. That's because knives are different from other things. What is special about a knife that enables it to fulfill that function? Good, sharpness. It is sharp. A knife is able to cut because it's sharp. Or what about an eye? What is the distinguishing feature of an eye? What enables it to actually fulfill its function?
The biology of an eye.
The biology of an eye? Yeah, the fact that it can see, right? And then whatever underlies, in physical terms, that ability to see. What about teaching? What is it that enables, you might say, a teacher to teach well? What special characteristics do teachers have that makes them different from others?
Being able to get information into the students' minds.
Good, being able to communicate information effectively, right? Getting whatever's in my mind somehow into your mind. That's something that is an important skill, an important ability that a teacher has that others might not have. And so in each case, there is something special about that thing. What is really the special characteristic of knives is sharpness. That's what gives them the ability to cut. The ability to see. That's what enables an eye to actually have the function of seeing. The ability to teach, to communicate information, is what enables a teacher to teach. So now the question is, well, if that's the case with us too, then we have to ask, what is special about people? What is our distinguishing characteristic? We've asked, how does a knife, for example, differ from other things? Now we need to ask, how does a human being differ from other things? What makes us different from a table? What makes us different from a plant? Or from an animal, a cat, a raccoon? Yeah? Intelligence, that's one possible answer. You might say, we're smart, okay? We have a kind of intelligence that other animals do not have. And so maybe that's what is our special characteristic, and that's going to imply something important about our function. What are some other things that are distinctive about us? Yeah.
We have consciousness of ourselves.
Ooh, self-consciousness, yes. Not just that we're aware of the things around us, but that we're in some sense aware of ourselves. Self-consciousness. That's something that a lot of people have thought animals lack, but that we have. Other things, yeah.
Our ability to reason.
Our ability to reason. The ability to solve problems, to reason things through. That's something that we have, at least to a very much higher degree than any other animal.
Language.
Language. We use language. Other animals don't use language. I mean, maybe they have perhaps some. I don't know what my cats are saying when they go meow. But whatever it is, I don't think it's a very complex language. Other things that are distinctive about us. Yeah. Well, we evolve, it's true, but on the other hand, so do other animals, right? That's how we got here. So that we take place in a process of evolution is a distinguishing feature. Maybe that we have a special spot in that process of evolution. Yeah?
The ability to act beyond simple instinct.
The ability to act what?
Beyond instinct.
Beyond instinct, yes, that seems connected to reason, to intelligence, this idea that we don't just react by instinct, but actually have the ability to go beyond that somehow. Yeah?
Thought.
Thought, yes, thought. Other animals may think, but it's surely the complexity of our thoughts, the kinds of thoughts we're able to have are different from those of other animals. There are some philosophers who think animals can't think. I happen to think they can, they just have relatively simple thoughts. Yeah?
Effectively sharing information from generation to the next.
Effectively sharing information from one generation to the next. Yeah, we pass on things. Again, do animals do that? Maybe the mama cat might teach the baby cat how to bathe itself or whatever. But surely the extent to which we do that is vastly greater. Yeah?
The ability to create and destroy.
The ability to create and destroy. Good. We make things. We actually produce things. That's something that other animals don't tend to do. And we also destroy things. Other animals might do that, but not in the ways we do. I did once witness a horrible battle between some kind of flying ant and a hornet. And a whole colony of these. It was like a war. So some people say, only human beings actually fight wars. Not true. Oh, horrifying. Yes?
Empathy.
Empathy. We empathize with others. That's something that we may have. Again, either we have a different kind of thing, or at least we're able to do that to a different degree. A dog may know when you're sad and so on, but it probably can't think, ooh, let me put myself in your shoes. I know what it's like to be a student who just flunked an exam. So a dog's ability to empathize is fairly limited. Yeah?
The ability to believe in a higher being, so religion.
Oh, religion. Okay, good. Human beings pray. They worship. Those are things that other animals don't do. Other things that seem distinctive of humanity. Yeah?
Culture.
Culture. Okay, good. We actually develop culture. So we have not only languages, but we have art, we have philosophy, we have all of the other formal and informal things that go along with having a culture. And animals do not seem to do that, right? Have you ever seen a raccoon museum? Have you ever seen dolphins actually construct a university? No. And so all these cultural institutions are things that human beings distinctively do. Yeah?
Our control of our environment.
Okay, good. We control our environment to a degree, again, that animals do not. An animal might build some kind of shelter, but it doesn't install air conditioning in that shelter, right? So we are able to control our environment in a way that other animals are not. Yes?
We have an understanding of the future.
We have an understanding of the future. Good. We are capable of thinking about the future. And other animals, again, if they're able to do this, it seems a very limited future they're able to think about. Maybe they're able to think about, I'm hungry, how do I get food? But it's not like they can really plan for tomorrow or the day after that or the month after that. And so our ability to think about the future does seem distinctive. Yeah?
Going off the environment, we control fire to a degree, so like we have like heat and energy.
Ah, good. We can make fire. We can control fire. That's something that other animals cannot do.
We lie.
We lie. Yeah, we can tell lies, right? I don't know what it would be for a cat to tell a lie, yeah, I mean, human beings are capable not only of thinking, but of then doing things with their thinking, like, fight wars, like tell lies, like do a variety of things like that, that animals don't seem to be able to do. Yeah?
I think the essential quality that underlies some of these other ones, like lying, seeing the future, and religion, is our cognition is explicitly conceptual. Like, for example, I think there's some studies that crows have some implicit understanding of things like changes in the water level when you put something into that container, but they don't have an active concept in their mind that they're referred to of water.
Okay, good. We have conceptual ability. So there's something about our thinking that enables us to actually craft concepts and think in terms of concepts. Other animals don't seem to be able to do that. So put a monkey, let's say, in a cage and put a banana up here and leave a couple of boxes around. The monkey may actually be able to figure out how to put one box on top of another and get the banana. That requires some kind of conceptual or cognitive abilities, but presumably the monkey doesn't actually have much of a concept of what construction is, let's say, or that type of thing. And so our conceptual abilities seem to make our thinking have a degree of complexity that animal thinking doesn't have. We actually formulate concepts. We can combine them in all sorts of different ways. We can combine them in new ways. We can solve problems with that. And we can do this in a highly complex fashion. Now, let's pause for a moment here and think, well, there are lots of ways then of answering this question. What's special about people? But is there anything they all have in common? I like the way your answer started by saying, here's something that many of the things we've talked about do have in common. They involve the use of conceptual abilities. They actually involve a kind of cognition where people are doing thinking, using concepts that connects to intelligence, to reason, to thought, to a number of other things that you've mentioned. And it's that that gives us the ability to construct cultures and use language and do a variety of other things that we've talked about. Have religions, for example. Produce art, produce other objects. So now, what does it mean to have those kinds of abilities? Aristotle's way of putting it is this. We are capable of acting according to rational plans. We are able, in other words, to use reason, these conceptual abilities, but we don't just use it to actually get around the world. We are able to think about the future. And that idea of planning for the future, he thinks, is actually vital. We are capable of planning and constructing complex plans in a way that other animals aren't. So being able to act according to a rational plan, he says, is what all of these things have in common. Now, there might be a lot more to say, both on the level of what do we have to do in order to be able to act according to rational plans, and that would lead us to reflecting on the nature of cognition and intelligence and conceptual abilities. Also, we could then think, well, what kinds of plans do we construct? And then we can investigate links to science, to culture, to religion, and a variety of other things that human beings manage to do. So all of those things, he would say, are connected to this. Some of you have talked about, as it were, the effects of our ability to act according to rational plans. Some have talked about the underlying things that must be true if we have that ability to act according to rational plans. But he thinks all of them are in some way tied to this ability. So that, he thinks, is really what all of those things have in common. They're connected in some way to our ability to act according to a rational plan. So he says, here is what the function of a human being is. It is an activity of soul, of the mind, really, which follows or implies a rational principle. It is the ability to do things that have some rational principle behind them. So you might say it's to act, and here he means not only physically act. He says an activity of soul, meaning it might be, yes, an intentional action of mind that involves bodily motion, but it could also be an activity that's purely a mental activity. And indeed, lots of thinking that we do involves this sort of mental activity. There might be no external sign of it. Sometimes, people accuse me of not working very hard. And I say, you don't understand what philosophy is. I work all the time. Because what does a philosopher do when he or she works? Thinks, right? Kind of like the Big Bang Theory. At one point, Leonard is asked, what does a theoretical physicist do? And he says, well, I think about things. Sometimes I write some of it down. That's kind of what philosophers do. We think about things. Sometimes we write some of it down. A lot of our activity is really just mental activity, thinking through problems and trying to come up with ideas and investigating those ideas and so on. So the idea here behind this is really there's an action. Could be an overt action, it could be a mental action that in some way has a rational principle behind it. Yes?
What is meant by an activity of soul?
Okay, good. His term soul is something that is used really in much the way we would use mind. So I think an activity of soul here is something like a psychological activity. It's something that may be actually driving a physical action. It may be taking place entirely within the mind. He doesn't mean something religious or something otherworldly about this. It's very close to what we would just call the mind. In fact, he has a work called the Dhyana on the soul, and it's really about psychology primarily. So So yeah, this is not meant to be some sort of scary metaphysical thing you might or might not believe in. He means it to be just a mental activity, in other words. Another question, yeah.
He says that we have a purpose. This is why he draws comparisons between us and animals. To say like what the purpose of an animal should be.
Oh, that's a good question. What's the purpose of an animal? What's the purpose of a cat? What's the purpose of an opossum?
I mean,
I-
it's a collective thing, and all animals, humans, work together, basically in the world going a certain way.
Ooh, all right. Now that's an interesting way of looking at things. You could say that it's the wrong question to ask. What's the purpose of a cat, or of a raccoon, or an opossum, or a mosquito? I've often asked that. What is the purpose of a mosquito? But that's my favorite version of the problem of evil, which we'll talk about later as a challenge to God's existence. Why are there mosquitoes? But anyway, that's something you can worry about and think, okay, the best way to answer that is to think about an entire ecosystem. These things might play a role in an ecosystem, and I can't answer the question apart from thinking about that ecosystem. Now, to the extent you think that's the right kind of answer to give about animals, it's a little scary because you could think, well, wait, shouldn't we be saying something like that for human beings too? And if not, why not? So that's one worry. A second worry is something like this. What is a cell phone for? You're mumbling. Come on, be bold. What is it for?
Communication.
Communication, yes, but look, I can do all sorts of other things on this cell phone.
Entertainment.
Look, Pokemon Go. Right? I can try to catch this Venomat that has appeared in my... There, look, nice throw. Curveball. Got one. Yeah, okay. So I can do that on my phone. I can watch videos on my phone. One thing I especially like to do, I can take pictures with it, but I can also practice music with it. Okay, there's a little, what do you call it? Metronome on here. And one thing I do if I'm especially bored on the bus is I think, okay, so how well can I do, all right, 78 beats per minute. Can I immediately start clicking at the right pace? Or, 132, can I pick out 100, I have no idea whether I'm doing this well or badly. But I've been practicing that, so I can look at music and just immediately intuit, okay, that means the beat is this. And that takes some practice. So that's one way of doing things. Or you might do pitches like, ooh, all right, what is that pitch? B flat. And so on. So you can practice. But look, a cell phone is good for all those things. So here's something you might worry about. Wait a minute, what is a cell phone for? The old cell phones were just for communication, for calling, but now you can do all this stuff. What if we have many functions? So two things you might worry you here. One is, do we know that human beings do have a function at all, at least apart from reference to some larger whole like an ecosystem or the universe as a whole? And secondly, do we have just one? What if all those things are really not tied together in the right way? What if our function is actually to use language and to use thinking and to plan and to pray and to construct cultures and to watch TV shows and so on and so forth? Then, anyway, so you should worry about this a little bit. Aristotle's making a bold claim here that unlike, let's say, some animals, we actually have a function that can be specified apart from some larger whole. And, moreover, all of those things we've referred to that are special about us do have something in common. Yeah?
But what if it's like our thought is our curse because we're questioning everything while other animals are just going about doing their normal thing, not really caring about living and dying, like not thinking about the future, but we think about the future and we want to give ourselves a purpose. But what if we really don't necessarily have a purpose? I mean, the Earth is such a small thing compared to what the universe is, So maybe we overthink things and we're just creating this dilemma for ourselves for no reason.
All right, you're asking a deep question here. She's basically saying, what if thinking is not our blessing but our curse? If it's our function, but it's a function that leads us to misery and ultimately to self-destruction. Miguel Unamuno said that we have a tragic sense of life that other animals don't have because of our ability to reason and our ability to feel emotions of a complex kind. And he thinks in a way it's not an entirely good thing for humanity that we have that ability. There's the old saying, ignorance is bliss. And indeed, maybe animals are happier than we are. They don't have existential crises. I mean, as far as I can tell, dogs and cats never go through this thing of like, am I doing the right thing with my life? You know? And so it might be that it's not entirely a good thing. I have some friends who published a paper on logic in which they needed a symbol for the circumstance in which people have no knowledge at all, complete ignorance, except for just logical truths. And you know what their symbol was? Just a big happy face, because it was a state of complete ignorance, and they thought, well, then it's bliss. So in their logic paper, you just find a little happy face, and that means a condition where people know nothing. Well, I thought that was very funny. It's the only funny thing about that logic paper. It's actually immensely difficult to read, other than that, which makes you motivated to keep going because you want to find the next happy face. Yeah?
Do animals have a function or a purpose? I guess besides, like, I guess the ecosystem, is there something that they excel at? Because if we're looking at, like, a knife, what does a knife do best? What does a dog do best? Or what does a lion do best? In that sense, if we look at these animals, I guess, how would we compare?
Great point. We need not only to answer this question, but we better have something that we can do well or badly. And so Aristotle says, in the end, well, let me skip past that, if our function is rational activity, being able to act according to a rational plan, and a good person is good at that, what does it mean? There are two kinds of goodness attached. There is excellence in the rationality part and excellence in the activity part. To excel at rational activity is to excel in both reason and activity. And so there are two kinds of virtues, he says. Moral virtues, excellences in activity, and intellectual virtues, excellences in rationality. Now, you raise a very interesting point. What if we talk about the excellence of a certain kind of, or the function of a certain kind of animal, and it's not the kind of thing that has an excellence? Then we wouldn't be able to do this. So it's important that we not only find something special about us, but then find a way of being good at that thing. If it was just something that there was no good or bad at, then it would be hard to go any further with Aristotle's strategy here. So I think you're right. It's important that this have a special kind of character. What would be something you couldn't be good or bad at? I don't mean a person, but I mean the thing would have a function, but there's no such thing as succeeding in that function or failing. In a way, describing it as a function, he would think, already builds it in as the kind of thing that this thing does and either successfully accomplishes or fails to accomplish. So I think he would think this comes just built into the idea of a function. But maybe there are extremely simple functions where there's really no better or worse. There's just you do it or you don't. Do or do not. There is no try. Right? Do or do not. There is no in between. So maybe a light, for example, a light circuit. Either it works or it doesn't. A light bulb, either it turns on and works or it doesn't. Now actually, light bulbs can go through this kind of almost burning out, kind of not very bright state. But a circuit is either on or off. It's not something in between. And so if it were something like that, you'd have to just say, well, it's being in this state rather than that state. But actually, most functions he thinks aren't like that. They are the kinds of things that you can do better or worse, and it's not just, yes, succeed, or no, fail. Yeah?
Adding on to that, I would also say like a knife and a light bulb and a phone, like they're all things created for that specific purpose. So like we have the purpose we want and we create a thing to match it, not the other.
Oh, all right, good. In fact, in that respect, you should think the knife and the eye are really different kinds of examples, right? Because the knife is something that is an artifact. We create it for it to have that function. And the same thing is true of the television set and a cell phone and all of that. Whereas an eye isn't something that anyone consciously created. That's something that arose by nature. And so you might think it's one thing for something created to serve a purpose, to have a purpose. It's another thing to find a natural object and say, what is the purpose of this thing? Notice here he's talking about a part of the body, an eye. it would be interesting to say, what is the purpose of a rock? What is the purpose of a tree? What is the purpose of a river? Where those are not things consciously constructed, they're parts of nature. But they're also, it isn't obvious what the larger whole is, like a human body or whatever, that it is actually serving a purpose within. Yeah. Yeah.
So a knife can dull, and in that case, does its purpose diminish?
Okay, good. A knife can get dull. It still has the purpose of cutting, it just does it less well. And similarly, a human being still has the function of acting according to a rational plan. But that's something you can do well or something you can do badly. And the badly part can come through either a rational deficiency, you don't think it through in the correct way, or it can be a failure of activity. You had a good plan, you just did not carry it out successfully. So the failures can go in different directions depending upon what part you fail at. It could even be a combination of the things. It might be, look, that was an excellent activity, and that was an excellent thinking through the problem. It was just not the right activity to choose, given that analysis of the problem. Yeah?
By this definition, would you say that someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia loses their humanity?
Ooh, now what happens if you utterly lose your rationality? You no longer have the ability to act according to a rational plan. He would say then you're no longer fulfilling the function of a human being. Does that mean you're not a human being? No. It means you're like a knife that is too dull to cut. You're not fulfilling your function anymore, but it doesn't mean a knife that's too dull to cut anything is not any longer. I mean, we don't say it's not a knife. It's just not a good knife. And certainly a person who, through dementia or something else, loses their ability to act according to a rational plan, now is not being very good at this acting like a human being thing. But that doesn't mean they're not human. So I don't think he would want to draw any big conclusions from that. There are ways of excelling at this sort of human activity, this human function, and ways of not excelling at it. And that would be one way of not excelling. Yeah?
Couldn't our function change based on whose lens we're viewing it through? Like to a tree, our purpose would be to change oxygen into carbon dioxide.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay, good. Ask a tree what the purpose of a human being is. You might say, well, to provide food for trees by actually converting oxygen into CO2. Thanks, humans, because now I can convert CO2 into oxygen. That's something that would make a certain kind of sense from a point of view, which is why I was worried about this question of a function being part of a larger system. If you start thinking that's true of human beings, and the tree might see it that way, and lots of other people might see it that way, then you can start saying, oh, now I can't really talk about our excellence except by talking about our role in that larger system. Excellence would have to be defined in terms of contributing what I need to contribute to the larger system. And that isn't Aristotle's strategy, but it would be another way of starting where he starts and then going off on a different turn here. So I think that's a good option to point out. That would be a possible way to go given this starting point. Yeah?
I guess you could emphasize our excellence that we have several other functions for purposes that go with smaller branches, so that we can go beyond that as well. So that there's a simple answer for specific examples, but that we have our own on top of it.
Oh, yes. Okay, good, yes. So, for example, think of the example of the teacher. The teacher is fulfilling a function of a human being, that is acting according to a rational plan, but also doing that in a specific way that gives the teacher an additional function. And so you're right, that sometimes there are certain ways of excelling, you might say, at the function that enable you to fulfill other functions. What all human beings have in common, he thinks, is this function of acting according to a rational plan. But if you excel at that in a certain way, that may enable you to start fulfilling other functions too. And in fact, you could imagine then that the function of something is actually not so much to do a certain thing as to be able to have the ability to take on other functions, which would be an interesting way to think about the function of a human being. Yeah?
So, is the way these two, like, they're in their relationship together, so to be excellent is there like a specific definition for each one, meaning to be a successful human being needs to act according to what was it?
A rational plan.
A rational plan, but then to act according to a rational plan is to be excellent. Like, do they have two different definitions, or are they both defined by each other?
Ooh, all right. He's worried that there might be some circularity here. So we need to talk about what it is exactly to have excellence in rationality and excellence in activity. And I'll do that in a second, but there's somebody who's been wanting to get in. Yeah.
Oh, actually, it has to do with that. This seems to me to be very dangerous because if excellence is simply more or less being good at activities or good at thinking, you can have some abominable thoughts and do some ghastly things, but if you can do them well, that would be virtuous.
Okay, good. That's a great question. What does it mean if you're, let's say, a brilliant criminal mastermind? You might excel in a certain kind of activity, but it might be a really deeply evil activity, right? And so, how can we identify goodness here with excellence in activity or excellence in rationality when they're capable of being used for evil purposes? Yeah.
If excellence and rationality is intellectual virtue, then we have to look at how Aristotle defines virtue. And then virtue has a narrow, this is sort of like Confucius, who you can't just, just because you're intelligent, you can carry out a plan. If it's not within that narrow criteria for virtue, living within the mean, then it would not be excellent.
Okay, good. He's going to constrain this in such a way that it's not just having a very clever plan, it's not just carrying out an activity effectively. You've got to actually do more. So we really need to talk about now what it is to have a rational excellence, an intellectual virtue, what it is to have an excellence in activity, a moral virtue. Those are going to be two different accounts. We've got those two parts of our function, the rationality part, the activity part, so we get these two different kinds of virtue, two different kinds of excellence in those. So, intellectual virtue. He says, look, that can be taught. At least to a large degree, it can be taught. It's something that someone else can communicate to you. How do you think about this kind of problem? You can be taught how to think about that kind of problem. Moral virtue can't be taught. Now, that's not to say you can't talk about it, you can't define what courage is, for example. You can't look at great examples of nobility, generosity, humility, kindness, and so on. But, he says, in the end, moral virtue isn't just knowing something, it's doing it. You can, what's the phrase? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can actually teach a student ethics, but you can't make them act ethically. That's something that requires an excellence in actual practice, in doing it. So, what's involved in this? I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because we're going to come back to that problem a number of times. He says, in order to actually develop this excellence in activity, first of all, it's not something that just can be taught. It requires practice. You have to develop habits. We become good, he says, by doing good things. Now, in that respect, being a moral person, attaining the virtues, is not like learning physics or learning biology or learning sociology or something else. It is not a question of even being trained about how to do this or that other thing. It takes practice. So think about learning to play a musical instrument, for example. You don't just read about it, right? I mean, suppose you want to learn to play the guitar. Could you just read a book on playing guitar? No, you actually have to do it, right? Same thing with playing piano or playing the flute or any of this. You have to practice it. It's not a question of just reading about it in a book. You actually have to do it. I once, by the way, agreed to play harpsichord in this Baroque group. I play organ, I play piano. I thought, oh, harpsichord. I like the sound of a harpsichord. I'll play harpsichord. And I found out playing harpsichord is really different from playing organ or piano. I mean, the notes are right there. I thought, how hard can it be? Well, here's what happens if you press a note on an organ and hold it down. Here's what happens on a piano. Boom. Here's what happens on a harpsichord. So, you get to the grand ending chord, where in the organ you'd be going, da, and you just go, it's gone. What do you do? You have to constantly be doing it. Anyway, it wouldn't have been enough to just read that. You actually have to practice it. You have to learn how to do it. And that's the same thing with how we become good. We have to put it into practice. So he says, there are these two kinds of virtue, intellectual and moral. Intellectual virtue is something that requires teaching. That's how we develop it. But moral virtue is different. It comes about as a result of habit. You get into the habit of exhibiting that virtue. So it goes in something like this one. Suppose you think there's some virtue you lack but you would like to have. How do you attain it? First of all, fake it. He says that how do you fake it? Find a role model. Find somebody else who has that virtue and start imitating them. And initially, this will feel inauthentic. You'll think, I'm totally faking. I'm not really like that person. But you'd like to be more like them. So you start faking it. And then you get into the habit of faking it. And at some point, that habit becomes second nature. You don't have to fake it anymore. You don't even have to think about it. You just do that automatically. That is having a virtue. So what's an example of a virtue that someone might lack but want to have and develop in this way? Yeah?
Self-confidence.
Good, self-confidence. You think, yeah, I don't have much self-confidence. I'm really nervous about everything. How can I develop more self-confidence? Aristotle would say, first of all, pick out a person who seems self-confident to you. You'd like to be more like. So imagine that person in your head, right? They're going to be your role model for this. Now, start imitating them. What do they do to exhibit self-confidence? Well, maybe they walk into a room and there are other people there, and instead of just going off into the corner and standing by themselves and wondering if anybody's going to talk to them, they go over and introduce themselves to somebody. So you watch that person, right? You feel super awkward at the party, but you see that person come in, they start doing this, think, I'll do that too. So you walk up to somebody and say, hey, how are you? My name is Dan. And initially you feel like, oh, this is really out of my character. I mean, I'm feeling super nervous about this. I'm just pretending to be confident. I'm not at all. But you get into the habit of doing this, right? You do it once. You find out you do not die as a result of doing that. So you do it again, and you do it again, and you try to get into the habit of walking into the room, a bunch of people you don't know. You're the first one to go over, and you have to force yourself at first, but then gradually you develop that habit. Finally, you walk into a room and you realize for the first time you never actually had to think about it. You just went over and shook somebody's hand. And boom, now you actually have the virtue. It's become second nature. Yeah?
So does Aristotle believe that some people are born with certain virtues just that come naturally, or is everybody constantly learning from somebody else before them and before them?
Okay, great question. Are some people just born with the virtues, or does everybody do it in something like this way? I think he thinks that everybody to some degree has to do it this way. But he does say some people are closer to the virtue by nature. That is to say, some people are actually going to be born so their inclination goes in a certain direction. For some people, they'll be sort of naturally extroverted. What I'm just describing will come easily to them. So it won't take much of any training at all. Other people are very introverted. It will take lots of training for them to do this. So people will differ, but I think he never thinks, oh, somebody's just a natural virtue in something. It always requires a little bit of training. And for some people it requires a great deal of training. Some he thinks can't be trained. For some people it's just the threat of punishment. It's like do it or else. Those people aren't capable of virtue, they just have to be forced into things. And it's probably not there might be people who just lack all virtues, but he thinks some people might just not have the capacity to develop a certain virtue, even through habits and so on. In the end, he says why laws are necessary. Otherwise, we'd just train everybody to have the right habits and we'd all be good. But some people, it all fails, and so we have to actually have laws and other ways of forcing people into things. But notice what he says. I become temperate, that is to say self-controlled, by doing temperate acts, by exhibiting self-control. I become brave by doing brave acts. I become generous by actually doing generous acts. How do I tell the difference between a generous act and one that goes too far and becomes indulgent, spoiling someone, for example, or one that is stingy? I develop practical wisdom. And he says this is something that emerges from my development of these habits. I don't start out being wise. I don't think through these things philosophically and come up with a formula that tells me how to draw the lines. I have to know. I have to develop a sensitivity. So think about playing a musical instrument. It's one thing to learn to play the notes, But it's another thing to play them beautifully, right? And to know at what volume you want to actually play that note and how to make that a beautiful note. That requires a sensitivity that comes from practice. And it's not something that can exactly be taught or explained. So too, virtue is like that. A friend is upset. What's the right thing to say in that situation? Should you be generous and think, oh, listen, I know you're upset. I sympathize. What a nasty thing for that person to have done to you. Should you say, look, grow up. Yeah, some people are going to be jerks. Don't let it get you. What should you do? Aristotle says, I can't explain that for you. I can't give you a formula. In the end, it requires sensitivity. You have to develop the ability to be good with people, to know what they need to hear. And there's no formula for that. There's no way of explaining it. It's something that you learn gradually as you get better and better at something. Now, he does think, just like Aristotle, that virtues are means between extremes. And this has a specific structure for him. We have certain drives, we have certain desires, and the purpose of a virtue is really to constrain that desire. But we have to constrain it to the right degree. All of these desires, he says, are good things, but not in unlimited amounts. Think about your drive for food. It's very good that you have hunger and a desire for food. If you didn't, you would starve to death, you would die. But does that mean it's always good to have that desire for food? You should give in to it all the time. No. And so it's something that is a good thing. You shouldn't suppress it entirely, but you can't allow it to be unconstrained either. So we've got to give in to desire, whatever that desire is, but only in the right circumstances, in the right way, at the right time, toward the right object and for the right reason. So you should be eating the right things at the right times for the right reasons. Okay? And that's a very simple one. But what about generosity? Well, you should be exhibiting generosity, helping others in need at the right times, in the right circumstances, in the right way, for the right reason. And how do you tell that? How do you know what the right time is, the right circumstances, the right way? Well, that's practical wisdom. So, there are some quotes here I'm skipping over, but they're good things to know for the quizzes. Now, let's take a look then at what virtue is. Virtue is a state of character concerned with choice lying in a mean, the mean relative to us, being determined by a rational principle, and that principle by which the man of practical wisdom would determine it. So, here's how it looks. Think about generosity. He often talks as if there's a point here, but really I think it should be viewed as a range. The person who sees someone who, let's say, in need, gives to the others, to another person in the right way, at the right time, the right amount, for the right reason, that person is generous. If somebody gives too little, they're stingy. If they give too much, they're extravagant. And here are the key virtues and vices for Aristotle. Now notice we've talked about this, how any virtue theorist has hundreds, thousands maybe, of good character traits to pick out. Here are ones Aristotle discusses in detail and seems to consider most important. First of all, courage. In some ways, he says courage is the most fundamental virtue. Why? Because really, it's required to get you to do anything at all. It's one thing to think about things in the right way, another to actually put that into action. And so lots of other virtues depend on courage. But now you might be cowardly, giving in too much to fear. You could also become rash, giving in too little to fear. The person is going to go bungee jumping. Shows up and he and his friends realize nobody brought the bungee cord. And somebody says, well, I got a rope in the back of my head. Let's just use that. So he jumps off the bridge with just a rope tied around his ankle. It pulled off his foot. Okay? That was not courageous. Okay? It was A, stupid, and B, rash. Well, sorry, that one's really upsetting, you can tell. Let's move on to the next one. The virtue with respect to the drive of pleasure, or the desire for pleasure, is self-control. You can become too little self-control, then you're self-indulgent, but you can exhibit too much self-control. You can become what he calls insensitive, the sort of person who just doesn't participate in enjoyments you ought to enjoy. A concern for material goods, that's generosity. The virtue for self-esteem, it's being high-minded. Anger, that's being gentle, getting angry for the right reasons at the right times. Sociability, we call that friendliness, right? Too little of that and you're unfriendly, but too much of that and you become, well, obsequious. When a friend of mine went to college the very first day, this guy showed up at his door, knocked on the door and said, "Hey, my name is Billy and I want to be your friend." Okay? That was a little too friendly maybe, right? That's going on to be obsequious. Boasting, you should be truthful. Humor, you should be witty. A drive for honor, you should be motivated. And then spending, you should be magnificent. You should have good taste. All of those, he thinks, are important. And notice we would think a lot of those aren't strictly speaking moral. He has a broader concept of the moral than we tend to have.